Hello, everybody. Welcome to Soapbox. My name is Mauro DiPasquale. I'm the executive director here at WCCA TV. Thank you for tuning in to cable channel 194, and also everywhere around the world you can watch this program at WCCATV.com. Streaming in real time here at WCCA from Worcester, Massachusetts. We're glad you're joining us. WCCA got a lot going on. We want to make sure you know to register for our spring classes now. If you're into our winter classes, you're already learning production techniques and how to produce in our studios and in the field. We offer production workshops and editing and all that continually through the year. So be sure to register today. Go online at WCCA TV, look up training, and we'll get you involved with those classes. We want to say happy birthday to WCCA TV. As of this year, we're 30 years old. So we want to thank all our circle of friends and our sponsors, especially for this program, Stephen Welch Opticians and Sal Curie at Curie Moda, and all the circle of friends members like Michael Gaffney, who's been a year-long supporter here, and Dr. Freshner. So we appreciate your sponsorship and your support. And for more about WCCA, to get involved, to register, to sign up, if you want to do an internship or volunteer, give us a call at 508-755-1880, or look us up online again, and you can find all that information there at WCCATV.com. There you can also sign up for our newsletter, so you want to make sure you do that. Get involved with our newsletter. Find out all that's going on here. We have a great diversity of television programming here. More programs are produced in this one station than if you took all the other cable channels and combined on the spectrum. We're producing more local originated programmings right here than all of those right now, folks, and that is the fact. So get involved. We want to see you be part of it. And one final announcement, because it's January 2016, don't forget, you may have saw previous episodes where we talked with our friends from the Worcester Free Tax Service. They're going to be kicking in this week here in Worcester. They have a number of locations: Plumley Village, the Worcester Community Action Council, and Worcester State University, where you can get your taxes done for free. You may qualify for earned income tax credit, so it's a great opportunity to get extra money into your pocket, plus get free taxes done. So there are requirements in order to do that, so contact those people. Look us up. Again, the information is online at WCCA TV, or you can give us a call, 508-755-1880. Without further ado, I'd like to get into today's program. I think this will be kind of interesting. I know I'm going to learn a lot because this is an area I know very little about right now. Brownfields and environmental consulting. We have some experts here from Wilcox and Barton. We have our friends. We have Mr. Bill Wilcox, who's one of the co-founders and president. He's also a geologist. And it's a good way to start my morning off with some science.
There you go.
And we have Mr. David Foss, who's the vice president of Wilcox and Barton. He's also a hydrogeologist. Did I get that right?
Absolutely,
I get that title right. I need to know what that means, so I'm going to learn. I'm excited about that. Welcome to Soapbox and to WCCA TV, you guys.
Thank you, Mauro.
So let's start off. Tell us a little bit about Wilcox and Barton Incorporated, and congratulations, you recently celebrated a 15th anniversary as well. So that's always good news, and it means obviously that what you do is important, and there's a need for it. So tell us about that, and give us a little bit of a history of the company.
Well, thanks for asking. Russ Barton and I went to college together in the 80s, and we both studied geology. We then later found ourselves working for the same larger 650-person environmental engineering firm with headquarters outside of the New England area. We both were senior managers working in Boston for that company. And I know I was living at the I-95 area, Waltham, and commuting into Boston on a daily basis, fighting the traffic in and out. We had about 55 employees working with us in Boston, and everybody was commuting from outside of Boston into Boston and fighting the traffic. We thought there was a better way of doing business. About 15 years ago, we started our company in the second floor of a garage in Vermont with a little bit of a different twist. First of all, we wanted to be a work-at-home company. So all of our employees today, for the most part, work at home. At home, we have a very strong life-work balance. we thought there was a different way of doing business. The traditional environmental engineering firm has a few members at the top of the pyramid who are the senior folks and a whole host of junior employees. We wanted to turn that triangle upside down. At our company, with our 25 staff, approximately 65% of the staff have greater than 15 years of experience. So we have a whole host of senior professionals, experts, and a few junior people. That means that our senior professionals are working day to day with our clients and our projects, and the junior folks are collecting the field data. So the big change for us is that our senior employees are working with the projects, with the clients on a daily basis, and carrying that project from beginning to end, which is a little bit different. Also, we're a virtual company. All of our files are in the cloud, per se. We are distributed throughout the entire New England region, so our senior employees and all of our staff can get out to our projects easily, and they're accessible, which is much different than working in Boston in an office place.
Yeah, yeah. So you and it's a good impact on the environment, which you guys are heavily involved in, obviously,
sure.
too, right? Less into fossil fuels, I guess, by keeping people in their homes. You mentioned projects and field data. Can you talk a little bit about that? What type of projects would you be involved in?
Sure. We work for a whole host of different environmental communities. For example, we work for utilities, both on the electrical side and on the telephone side. Municipalities, federal government, but more importantly, all the petroleum storage companies, the retail gas stations, fuel oil companies, and any commercial developer who wants to develop or transact real commercial property.
Oh, okay. So what's the value of that? You know, as an environmental consultant, you know, who in particular might
Sure.
You mentioned municipalities, but how would that work? Why would they be calling you?
Yeah, it's very important for the environmental consultant to keep up with the regulations.
Okay.
So anybody who has a facility, a company with a facility, they have environmental equipment that needs to maintain compliance. So as the regulations are changing, the environmental consultant will work with that facility owner to make sure all their environmental pieces of equipment are fully compliant.
Okay. No, that's good. Don't stop.
Actually,
yet.
if I can interject, you mentioned how there's the local tax preparers providing that service.
Right.
One of the reasons that you or I would call a tax preparer is that the tax code changes every year,
right.
And I'm just a simple hydrogeologist. I don't want to keep track of what the tax regulations are every year.
Right.
Well, most business people don't keep track of the environmental regulations as they change on it every year.
Do.
Exactly. And so what we do is make sure that we're up to speed on all the federal, state, and local regulations. And so if you have fuel storage tanks or a generator that is burning fuel, but so it's creating an exhaust, so it might have an air permit. All those different facilities, when you either use a fuel or create waste, like if you're a gas station, you do oil changes, you create waste. Those processes are all regulated.
Yeah.
And so we keep track of what the regulations are, how they're changing, and make sure we communicate that to the business owner or the property owner.
Yeah. Now, I would imagine you really have to sort of, as a company, you sort of have to make sure you're out there because, maybe not every business is thinking in terms of those kinds of regulations. Like, for example, we're going to be doing some, renovation project. Mm-hmm. And if we get into the land, there's an issue there, right? We should be aware of. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of the examples that I was hoping to discuss is when someone does the redevelopment of a commercial property. So maybe it's a property just like this in downtown Worcester,
right.
And so it's a building with history. When this building was first built, maybe they used coal to heat the building, but now you use heating oil, or you've changed from heating oil to natural gas. But you have these histories of chemical use and chemical storage, and when someone's going to either buy a property like this, a historic property, or renovate it, there's going to need to be some financing. And so really the people who often push a business owner or a property owner to call their environmental consultant. And in Massachusetts, there's a privatized program called the Licensed Site Professional Program. And so one of the acronyms that goes behind my name is LSP, which stands for Licensed Site Professional. We have to design and implement either assessment, so evaluating a property, or cleanup programs in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But if you're looking at a building like this, we would do an assessment and we could look to see what kind of historic issues may be in the ground. And so that's why you're talking to a geologist and a hydrogeologist. What we think about are how you have something that was in the building and then may have spilled into the ground and could then affect soil and groundwater beneath the building. And most importantly, one of the biggest changes in the regulatory program, both on the federal and state level, has been something called vapor intrusion, which is thinking about how chemicals that may have gotten in the ground could then possibly get into indoor air. And so one of the things that we do is evaluate, possible sources of that kind of contamination, and then help people come up with plans to fix it, to prevent it from getting into the building. So a building like this may have asbestos or lead paint, but you may also have historic contaminants in the ground, and that's not a big deal. You can still redevelop around that, but you want to understand what those are, so you're being protective. So when we design your new facility, we're protecting the future users of that building.
Yeah. Bill, I know you wanted to chime in.
Oh, no, I just, the point is, so whenever we're transacting commercial properties, we have to do what they call the Phase 1 environmental site assessment. And that process is when we come to the site, we'll inspect the site, we'll interview the owners and the occupants, we'll research municipal and state files, and what we're looking for are what we call recognized environmental conditions. And those are conditions that may pose an environmental liability to a potential purchaser of a piece of property. What we're looking for are above ground storage tanks, underground storage tanks. How is the property historically used? Do they have floor drains and oil water separators? Those are the type of issues that we're trying to identify during a due diligence walkthrough. And that pertains directly to the brownfields redevelopment that David was speaking about. David, do you want to give an example of a brownfields project in Worcester?
Sure. So Worcester has a great brownfields history, and without getting too much into the political backstory, back when Tim Murray was mayor, he started something called the Brownfields Roundtable, and really brought to the forefront the need for a public-private partnership. Like, most big brownfields redevelopment projects can't happen with just one bank account. One private developer is not coming through.
It's very expensive to remediate.
It is, and a lot of the properties have significant public benefit in that redevelopment. So the Volk School is a great example of a brownfields redevelopment. Something that's just finished up in this last year is the Worcester Telegram and Gazette building. So here's a commercial building that had 100 years of history, and the Worcester Business Development Corporation, with Craig Blaze as executive director, really led the charge on that. They became the developer of that project. But that's because a kind of a private developer would never have been able to pull that off with their own financing. It really needed some public support, and it needed private support, and that couldn't happen until there was an end user. And then we have the whole hospital district downtown, and now there's the ongoing development of the South Worcester Industrial Park, the SWIP. So there's great ongoing successes in Worcester for brownfields redevelopment. One thing that I wanted to highlight is there's lots of different funding mechanisms. So I mentioned that if you have an expensive redevelopment project, I'm going to make up a number and say you have a $50 million redevelopment project. Well, a private developer, seeing that end use, may be able to come up with half that money. But some of the things that go into that might be rebuilding infrastructure, so getting the street prepared, or the utilities in the road, or the public access parts of that. And that's places where public funds can be used. Or if there's a brownfield, so it has some sort of big negative environmental issue, public funds can often be used to pay for that cleanup, to get it to kind of a clean starting point for the private developer to come in. And so the city of Worcester has an ongoing program. So the city has received a grant from the EPA, so the Environmental Protection Agency is the federal agency. And they have something called the Brownfields Cleanup Revolving Loan Fund. So I'll just call it the Revolving Loan Fund. The director in the mayor's office is a guy named Paul Morano Jr. He's the director of business and community development, I believe. I may be misspeaking his title.
Economic development.
Economic, yes, thank you. And he's a great resource. So, certainly we would love to talk to people, and if people had a potential site or a property in mind, we can help them understand what the eligibility requirements are. Again, like you mentioned, the tax preparation, reach out to see if you're eligible. Well, the same thing for spending some of the federal money on brownfields dollars, you have to make sure that you evaluate and to see that you're an eligible party. But the city has this revolving loan fund that can be used for the assessment, so doing that, looking for recognized environmental conditions, and for cleanup, to different parties. That could be either a private developer, a nonprofit. And so there's a whole range of folks who could be eligible for that money. The city's revolving loan fund currently has about $1.2 million in it. And since the mid-90s, the city of Worcester has received over $3.4 million from the federal government. So there's a really nice I don't want to say pot of money, but there's a funding mechanism from the EPA Brownfields program. That it's an ongoing program, and the fact that the city has this revolving loan fund is a really great resource for both current business and property owners and potential developers coming to Worcester.
Now, how dangerous are these? Is a brownfield? I mean, it's sitting there. If it's undeveloped, there's some toxins there. Obviously, there's something there that can be harmful, because otherwise there wouldn't be any regulations.
Actually,
that, right? Or,
so actually,
that's people see brownfields. They go, wait.
I love that you just said there's obviously some toxins there.
Okay.
Because so a brownfield, and I apologize, I'm going to actually read the sentence.
Yeah.
The EPA, so the federal government, has their definition of what a brownfield is a real property whose expansion, redevelopment, or reuse is complicated by hazardous substances, pollutants, or contaminants. It's complicated because they may not really be there. So that's the issue, is we look at an old industrial property and we have to assume that there's potentially contamination.
Right.
But until you've done that testing, it's a great big question mark. So you're right, many properties go undeveloped because it's been owned by a single family for a long time.
Something. Right.
They don't really want to know. Like if you're the owner, like you don't have that future use in mind. You're like, oh, let's leave it untouched. We don't want to see what it is. But if that's a $10,000 problem, that may not hurt a redevelopment project at all. If it's a $1 million problem, that could really change the balance sheet on how they calculate the financing. And so it's all about the perception of a problem. That's why they would call an environmental consultant and say, come do your due diligence. Let's.
Now, is someone, I don't mean to cut you, but
No,
is if someone owns property that can be designated brownfield, are they liable to remedy that right away? Or, can they just say, well, I'm going to sell this and leave it to the next person to do?
So similar to how Title V works for septic systems. So if you're going to do a house, you have to do a Title V before you transact it, right before you sell the property, if you're in a place without sewer.
The time.
Well, usually the buyer will have a bank, unless someone's paying cash for a property, and usually for commercial properties, that's not very common. So the buyer's bank or lender will say, you have to do the site assessment. Go do what's called a 21E, which is the Massachusetts shorthand for a phase 1 site assessment. You might hear a real estate agent say, do you have a 21E? Or I have a clean 21E, which means they've done their site assessment. So a buyer's bank is always going to push that, right? Because if you're about to buy a property, do they want to loan you money to buy someone else's problem? But so that's a clear mechanism for people to get into the system. We often advise people to say, you should do your assessment as soon as you know you plan to sell in the future. Because if you do your assessment, you learn what the problems are, you get to control what the steps are to fix it, which often means you get to control the cost.
Yeah.
And so, but you mentioned, like, would someone have to remedy something right away? So me with my LSP license, licensed site professional, there are certain characteristics. So if we go into a phase 1, usually there's no reason to notify Mass DEP. Like that's really looking at history and looking at paperwork to identify those recognized environmental conditions. But if we do a phase 2, so we actually sample soil or groundwater, if we get a detection of something above the DEP standards, then there is a notification requirement. And there's a couple of other situations that are called an imminent hazard, where I would have to notify the DEP right away. Like I would tell you as a property owner, you have 2 hours to notify the DEP based on what we just found. And but those are pretty rare, and they're also very similar to the things that would make you call 911. Like if either I or the fire chief encounter a certain situation, we say, that's an imminent hazard. We tell the property owner, but basically we say, you have 2 hours to notify, because it is an imminent hazard. Like there's a real and immediate risk.
And generally, what kind of risk are those? Something that's going to contaminate our water supplies, or is it something that can hurt a person if they're standing in front of it waiting for a bus every morning? I mean, is there toxins that cause specific health problems?
So one interesting feature in an urban location like Worcester is, we've had 150 years of industry in town. A lot of that industry was burning coal as a fuel, either to heat their building, run their equipment. So one of the things that's a byproduct of that is called coal ash. So you have all this ash, and a lot of urban locations have urban fill. So when they redevelop a property, they want to make it nice and flat for that next building, and So they fill in those properties. And so one very common feature we find on urban sites is fill material that contains things like lead and arsenic. Like those are compounds that are bad for you, but they're bad for you if you ingest them. Like, so you don't want to build a kid's playground in soil that has high levels of lead, because there's a risk for lead poisoning. And so certain chemicals like that are in the ground in soil really pose a risk only for direct contact, ingestion. And so the way to prevent that risk is to build over them or build a cap or isolate that soil.
Right. Okay.
But a different site, so say for example a historic dry cleaner would have used a solvent, like it's called perchloroethylene, which is often called perc. That solvent is really great at taking grease and stains out of clothing. It also dissolves in water and is really bad for drinking or for breathing. And so if that chemical spills in the ground and gets to a drinking water well, that's a real environmental risk. Or if that chemical's in the ground and it migrates under a building and then vaporizes and volatilizes up into the building, that's a substantial risk. And so we look at an old history of a site, see what kind of chemicals were used, and then we'd say, you know what, this site needs soil testing. This site needs groundwater testing and indoor air testing. And both the federal government, the EPA, and the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, the Mass DEP, have very good, clear guidance on what those requirements are. So an environmental consultant has flexibility in how we design that program, but there's real big milestones that we can't miss, and that, you know, among folks like me who are licensed site professionals or engineers, you know, we take training classes to make sure we're up to speed on the current science and the current risk evaluations.
Businesses have to rely on companies like yours to keep up with these regulations and to make sure they understand, you know, any impact or changes of the regulatory system.
Yeah, we routinely check the regulations, and we're well up on them. For example, the underground storage tank regulations in Massachusetts are going to be changing in 2017. That means all single-wall steel gasoline tanks and single-wall lines will have to come out of the ground. So you'll see a lot of activity with the retail gas station marketplace. Other regulations that have recently changed are the spill prevention control and countermeasure plans recently changed, which talks about the storage of oil and how to put together a plan and have secondary containment for oil storage equipment. Other regulations that have changed, the ASTM standard changed.
That's
in
2013.
Right.
The regulatory program that I just mentioned with LSPs, which is called the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, had a major change in July 2014. So a lot of these regulations are changing, I'll say, every 3 to 5 years we see some updates. But there are sometimes technical updates that we're aware of, and we take training classes on to make sure that we're giving our clients the best advice.
How do those changes, you know, affect a development project midstream, or, you know, do you see that happening?
Absolutely. In fact, that vapor intrusion risk, so the idea that chemicals in the ground could potentially get into a building, we've seen that coming since about the mid-2000s, like 2005, 2007. Vapor intrusion was being an emerging concern, is how they decided, because the science was there. It was saying, you know, people should not be breathing these chemicals. But it takes a while then for the regulations to actually change. So we have been giving our clients advice along the way that says, you know what, the regulation doesn't require this now, but if you're going to build a new building, or say you're renovating your building, let's make sure you have protective measures in the ground. So for example, I've got a site in Framingham where they're going to put a new addition onto a building in the neighborhood of someone else's spill. So the site itself is fine. It's not a big, the site itself is not a problem, but we know that a neighboring property has a spill. And so what they're going to do is put some piping in the ground, a really well-designed vapor barrier, so basically call it a really thick plastic layer beneath the concrete slab of the new building, and those pipes will be set up so that in the future they can add a blower above ground. But if you're going to go and do all this underground work now, adding a small amount of PVC pipe to your construction project is a very low cost, and that means later on you want to add a few $100 fan to turn on the blowing system, you can. But if they hadn't done that now and it turned out there was a problem in the future, now you'd be cutting up your floor. And so there's things that we've been providing as guidance and advice, kind of in anticipation of some of those regulatory changes, partly because it makes good sense from science and a human health risk perspective.
Wow. You know, when I was a kid, I grew up in Green Hill Park area, and there used to be a nice stream there. My grandfather would take us up there and get the water out of the stream, and it was like a big deal. And then they put a dump up there.
Yep.
They had a public dump. And now it's I guess it must be, you could tell me, I guess it's capped because it's behind the Volk School.
Yep.
And it's where they now have like a sport field. They have like a soccer, football field
Right.
there, right? So in order for that to work, they had to do a considerable amount of work to, I imagine, to contain that.
Correct. So that's an example, and actually I have one from another city where we were building on a contaminated site, and there was a very large parcel, but the idea was to build a new middle school.
Yeah.
But it was the only location in the downtown area. So, you know, we talked to the city council, like, well, you can build a middle school out on the edge of town, but now busing is going to take forever and no one's close by.
Yeah.
So we built this middle school right in the downtown area of the city. But where the most gross contamination was is where we put the soccer fields.
Yeah.
Because basically, even though we did what was protective, if there are going to be vapors getting up, the idea is to keep them from getting trapped inside a building where people are living and
Right,
working.
right.
So the middle school has a great vapor barrier. It has all the right protective measures. But to be conservative, we put the soccer fields over, and actually a parking lot, over the worst area of contamination.
Yeah.
And the soccer fields have a nice cap below it, and it's
Yeah.
got 3 feet of landscape cover, so a kid taking a header in soccer is not going to eat the dirt.
Yeah.
But there's a way to be protective even in a highly contaminated area.
We got about a minute left, and there's a lot more questions I wanted to ask. I know they're going to do some streetscaping downtown, and I'm wondering, should they be considering that? They probably do.
I'm sure they have.
Because Main Street for years and years. But what grants and programs are available for developers, and what should people know
Sure.
in general in about a minute? Regarding permitting.
Sure.
too, as well.
So one thing, reach out to a consultant that you know and trust.
Yeah.
We're the kind of folks who can help really be a gateway to those programs. So I mentioned the city's revolving loan fund.
Yeah.
So Pomerano's office,
Right.
the mayor's website, great access point. The EPA has grants that are available. Those go out on an annual basis with an application in the fall, and they announce in the spring. Mass Development is another state program, another state business entity whose job it is to bring in more business to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Mass Development has brownfields grants available to folks. So if you're looking to buy a property like this and you didn't own it already, Mass Development might be a source of funding. Those are the key ones that are available as public resources.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you guys. 20 seconds, any final word from Wilcox and Barton? Yeah.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate the opportunity. We're a growing company. We're always looking for great talent, and
Yeah. How can people contact you if they have questions? Is it the office phone number, or is it a website?
the website, wilcoxandbarton.com, is the best way to get us.
Yeah. WilcoxandBarton.com. You can give us a call here at the station if you'd like further information. Thank you so much. This was really interesting. I wish we had more time. There's plenty more questions, but maybe you guys can come back sometime. And
Sure.
Do
Thank
a
you.
project.
Thank you, Mauro.
Good to meet you.
Maybe we can do a case
Thank
study.
you very much. Yeah, that'd be an interesting project. I want to thank Bill Wilcox and David Foss from Wilcox and Barton. A little science for you to start this month off of February here at WCCA TV. Folks, thank you for watching. Until next time, I'm Mauro DiPasquale. I look forward to seeing you on WCCA TV, the People's Channel.